Well, I hope you're not getting bored with this. We, honest to goodness, are finishing the coaling tower. Actually, at this point in time, by the time you see this, it may actually be finished, because right now all I'm working on is the roof. And I think the roof is the last thing that I need to put on here, sort of. And by sort of, what I mean is I've always intended this structure to have a sound system. I went to a lot of trouble recording the sounds to use here. So I just want to show you how the sound system's going together. So the sound system isn't part of the building. I mean, it's the sound of the structure operating, but it's just going to be playing through a speaker located near the building. It isn't, the speaker isn't going to actually be in the building. And so I don't need to address this right now while I'm building it. I'll be adding it in the very near future. While Karyn and I were in Chama a couple of years ago, the friends of the Chumbers and Toltec were good enough to fire the mechanism up so we could record the sound of it actually running. And that's super handy. So there's going to be a couple of different soundtracks that I'm going to mix together, because it's just going to all be playing through a single speaker. So one of the sounds is, of course, the mechanism inside running. That's the principal sound. But there's also the sound of the buckets going up and down on the track. And Karyn recorded these sounds. Now, they won't take the buckets all the way to the top, because they tend to jam and come off the tracks. So they just run them kind of up and down through the middle. But that's enough to get the sound of the thing. Unfortunately, well, there isn't a whole lot of sound here. It's a very light sound. So I decided it's going to need a little bit of augmentation. Plus, we don't have the sound of the coal being dumped at the top, because they don't put coal in the buckets and they don't take them all the way to the top. So I'm going to have to improvise the sound of the bucket tipping over and dumping the coal into the bin. Now, interestingly, while Karyn and I were at the train show in Wendover, Nevada, Wendover, Utah, it's on the Utah side, there's this old airplane left over from the movie Con Air. And in messing around with the door on this thing, I found that it makes the exact same sound as the buckets do when they sort of bind up on the track. And I thought, well, there it is. There's the sound I can use to augment the sound of the buckets on the track. Now, I've mentioned a few times on the show that I've done a lot of sound design over the years for different projects and so on. And I love to use Pro Tools. This is the computer I use for doing sound. Well, that's the computer I use for everything. I swear it's an actual antique. But the software I use for sound is Pro Tools. I can put together various tracks and mix them together. And it also has a really nice search engine, so I can go looking for the sounds I want to use, which is important because I have something like 100,000 sounds that I've collected over the years and purchased from various, but anyway, I have 100,000 sounds in here. So quite often I can just find a sound that I'm looking for, and if not, I can go record it. So here's the search engine, and I've just put in a search term called coal, and any sound effect in here that has anything to do with coal. And then some of these are just other effects that are coming up outside of the search. Here's the sound of a wooden door and another wooden door. It's taking them a second to load these things, and there they are. And then I can play them, and that doesn't seem like much. It's just a single clunk from a wood door. These effects over here are breaking glass. So you can see how important it is to have a decent search engine for looking. Otherwise, I'd be just wandering around in here looking. But in the bottom part of this screen are effects that actually contain the word coal in their name or in their metadata. So we have coal-fired steam locomotives. We have anything where the name coal comes up. Coaling tower. So here's where my coaling tower sounds are coming up. But again, anything that contains the word coal. Now for the sound of coal being dumped into the bin, since I don't have anything for that, I'm kind of searching. These are poor gravel sounds, pretty thin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pitch shifter here and a time shifter. There's these other tools in here, and it's great. So I can actually change the pitch and length of time on a sound. And then I can edit the sounds. I've laid the sounds into some tracks here, and there in audio 2 is the sound that we recorded inside the building of the mechanism, but there's some talking on here, so I want to remove that. So I'm just finding the area where I'm talking to the guys running the tower, and I'm just going to carefully remove that and then splice that out, and now it should just be the sound of the mechanism shutting down. So here's the sound of the buckets on the track and the airplane door sound. And of course the airplane door sound doesn't completely synchronize with the buckets. So I'm taking the individual clunks from the door here, and I can see the waveform on them. So I just slide that over a bit until the waveform of the clunk of the bucket on the track lines up with the slamming door. And then that way I can use the clunk there, the sound of the door closing, to augment the sound of the bucket on the track. So the finished soundtrack is going to feature the sound of the gears coming up to speed, the mechanism turning on, and then just running for a while without the buckets being engaged. And then after a while, the operator engages the buckets, and you hear the buckets moving up the track. And then after a while, we hear the coal being dumped into the bin from above. Now I need to mix the sounds together. A lot of them are too loud. That airplane door sound is way too loud, so I'm going to turn that down. I want to hear more of the sound of the buckets on the track, and I don't want the gear sound to overwhelm the whole thing. So I can move these sliders over here on the mixer, and it isn't actually a mixer. It's almost like an overgrown mouse. It's just running the software, but it looks like a mixer, and it functions a lot like a mixer, and it remembers everything I do over here. So when I'm in playback, if I've moved any of these sliders, it remembers how far I've moved them, and it will put them back into their original location. But this way I can set up the mix exactly the way I want it. Now another thing that I'm going to do is I'm building this up in stereo, so there's actually two speakers, but I don't really need stereo. So I'm going to have the sound of the engine shop in one speaker and the sound of the coaling tower in the other speaker, and the two speakers will be some 10 feet apart. But on the mix here, I'll have the sound of the engine shop playing out through one speaker and the sound of the coaling tower playing out through the other speaker. And I've recorded the sound in a lot of different locomotive shops over the years, so I have plenty of material there to work with. Mostly the sound of the greasing gun going. Now what you've been hearing here is just the sound through the monitor speakers being picked up by my phone. When you're doing screen recordings with QuickTime, it doesn't let you do audio. So I'm just using my phone. Anyway, so let me play back now the actual mix directly, not just the sound through the speakers. And so now here's the, I guess, the finished mix. I'm still going to keep tweaking it, but we've got the engine shop going in one speaker and the coaling tower going in the other speaker. These tracks are going to be playing from an Adafruit soundboard. I use those all around the railroad, and here's a link to some other shows about that. But the sounds have to be kept very low because there's sounds playing from a lot of the different buildings, and it'll just turn into a cacophony of garbage if they were played at all loud. So until you get right up next to a building, you don't really notice the sound coming from it. Or at least that's the intent. Because then on top of all of that, there are background birds and things going on, playing through the whole room. Anyway, I hope you found this mildly interesting and not terribly boring. And on next Sunday, we'll be finishing up the coaling tower. And then at some point, actually transferring these sounds onto a soundboard and installing them underneath the layout. And I hope you'll want to follow along with those things. So if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe. And you can do that by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it too boring. And we will see you here on Sunday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.